Hi class, welcome to week 2. This week you'll focus on writing specific, detailed, and non-subjective descriptions. This exercise will help you overcome some of the counterproductive habits of mind described in Chapter 2, specifically avoiding generalities, cliches, and subjective language. To that end, I want to take a moment to analyze some examples of descriptive writing. But before we get to those, let's quickly review the counterproductive habits of mind. There is the fear of uncertainty. Most of us don't want to look stupid, so we pretend to know more than we do. This is a powerful block to understanding. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, recognized this. While on the stand defending his life, he said that he was the wisest person in Athens because he was the only one who recognized that he knew nothing. Therefore, the analytical mind starts with questions. You have to assume that you don't know everything, even about topics on which you're an expert. There's also the problem of prejudging or the judgment reflex. Most of us tend to immediately decide whether something is good or bad, whether we liked it or hated it, whether we agree or disagree. This happens before we've taken the time to even know what it is we're judging. The best way to overcome this is to take the time to first accurately summarize or describe the object or idea on which you have to form an opinion. You also should avoid using should statements in your writing. We're also blinded by habits, and this can happen right at the level of language with cliches. Cliches are tired out statements that shortcut thinking. When we use them, we're not really thinking. An example of a cliche is, quote, thinking outside the box, unquote. This is actually used by our textbook on page 19. Take a moment to think about what that cliche means. It's asking you to be imaginative and think in a way that other people are not thinking, precisely by asking you to use the same statement that everybody uses for trying to not think like everybody else. There's also the problem of generalizing. This is the most common problem of beginning writers. Developing writers tend to make broad, non-specific statements that are not grounded in specific details or backed by any evidence. You work on fixing this by focusing on details and asking yourself, 1. How did I come to this conclusion? 2. Why do I feel this way? And 3. What specifically made me feel this way? There's also the problem of over-personalizing or relying too much on our opinions. We tend to think that our ways of seeing the world are natural, rather than assumptions that are shaped by culture and experiences. We think, that's just how it is, or say, it's just common sense, rather than recognizing that these are things that have been inculled in us from the moment that we've begun to think or speak. Sometimes we think that all ways of seeing the world are just personal opinions. But the statement, that is my opinion, tends to mean, I don't want to discuss it. Therefore, opinions can often be a means to close down conversation and even to stop thinking. So what's the difference between an idea and an opinion? An idea begins with a question, while an opinion has already settled on an answer. And an idea accepts that interest is a product of study, not a prerequisite. So now that we've reviewed, let's talk about how you will work to overcome those habits of mind in your writing. This week I want you to focus on showing, not telling. You do this by using specific details and imaginative verbs and adjectives to create effect. But you have to recognize that details do not speak for themselves. Therefore, you have to interpret the details for your reader. You have to tell your reader what you think they mean. Now, this may sound like it violates the book's caution about using subjective language. However, all writing is a communication. You are explaining how you understand something to be to your reader. No matter how objective the topic, you are sharing your thinking with your reader, but you don't want to overdo it. If your writing is too subjective, you will not be able to convince your reader of your thinking. So how do you fix this? You back statements with evidence. Saying something is beautiful, unique, special, or one of a kind means nothing to your reader. These are subjective and personal, and your reader has no reason to believe you. You need evidence to convince your reader. Take, for example, this sentence from a student who's doing very much the kind of assignment that you're going to write this week. It's an example of overly general prose. For those who choose to become one with nature, small, quiet waterways can bring one in close contact with the plants and animals of the region. What is the evidence? What kind of waterways is the student talking about? Lakes, ponds, streams? Even better than that, why not use specific names? This student was describing Maine to another group of students who've never traveled to Maine, but not once through the paper did he actually use any specific place names. He could have been describing York all the way up to Presque Isle. We had no idea. Also, what kind of plants, what kind of animals do you contact in these regions? Use specifics. Compare that non-specific sentence with this better example from another student. A cast iron arch that towers over an opening in the wall marks the entrance. From the base, the hill quickly rises to a peak that is about 50 feet above the rest of the park. Across from the entrance on the other side of the park, the hill drops dramatically, creating a very steep slope, and the feeling that viewers are much higher than they actually are. The climb to top of Bald Hill in the center of the park can be daunting for some, but the view from the top is worthwhile. Perched at the top of the hill, one can see for miles. The distant city surrounding Nashville become faint glows against the dark background as nightfall comes. At night, the rows of street lamps guide the eye from the outskirts of the city to the heart of downtown Nashville. To the west, the distant humming sounds from Vanderbilt University fill the spectator with the feeling that the city is alive with excitement. Everything underlined here represents a specific detail, while everything that is bold is an imaginative verb or adjective that helps the reader picture the scene. Also notice that the writer takes the time to explain what the details mean at the end of the second and third sections, i.e. creating a very steep slope and the feeling that viewers are much higher than they actually are, as well as fills the spectator with the feeling that the city is alive with excitement. So now that we've analyzed some student examples, let's look at your reading for this week. Out There, which is the opening to Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Notice how Capote uses rich descriptive language and specific details to ground his rather subjective interpretation of Holcomb. Each paragraph is dedicated to a specific character attribute of Holcomb, and he doesn't just tell his readers what he wants them to think of the town, he shows them and lets the reader feel Holcomb through details. For example, the first paragraph, which is shown here, establishes Holcomb as a lonesome western cowboy town. And I have marked it up here in the same way as the student example. All the underlying words represent specific details that ground his description, and everything bolded is an imaginative adjective or verb that helps the reader see the description. Notice, for example, that Capote doesn't say cowboy boots or cowboy hats. Instead, he describes the boots. Notice that the pointed toes echo the narrow trousers. And rather than mentioning a hat, he gives us a specific brand of hat. Also, notice that he doesn't completely avoid subjective evaluative language. He doesn't just throw a bunch of details at us. The bolded words represent those evaluative moments in vivid adjectives and adverbs. Notice that each of these bolded statements are backed by and proven by descriptive details that help us establish Holcomb as this lonesome western cowboy town. So after the first paragraph, it goes into the second paragraph and takes us on a tour of Holcomb, showing the decay of a once prosperous town. The third paragraph anchors its description on the depot, the cafe, and the two women working there. It's important to notice that this is an example of less is more. One or two well-chosen, fully described examples works better than a list of many superficially described details. The fourth paragraph surprises the reader with something that doesn't fit. The Holcomb School actually reveals the underlying prosperity of the town, as well as its diversity. We'll talk more about this next week when we learn the method. So, now it is your turn to write a one-page description of place. Go to Blackboard and follow the directions for paper 1. Good luck.